Part 1 video provided the example of Joseph Tkach Jr., who's involved in the decades-long conspiracy to destroy the credibility of God's church. This Part 2a video provides the second example of a leader involved in the conspiracy. Hello friends, this is Unmasked Truth with Harmanjit Saini, where I provide unique analysis of world events based on the unmasked truth that after surrender, Germany continued World War II clandestinely and became a killing machine. I also provide true news that you will find nowhere else. And part 1 video of Conspiracy to Destroy Credibility of God's Church, I described how Joseph Tkach Jr., the son of the leader appointed as successor of God's church, the worldwide Church of God, did everything in his power to destroy the organization. He succeeded brilliantly in dismantling everything God had restored through Mr. Armstrong, Herbert W. Armstrong, through whom God founded the modern era of his church. However, many of us who adhere to what Mr. Armstrong taught separated from the worldwide church. Unfortunately, many separate organizations developed because ministers could not agree on a single leader. Joseph Tkach Jr. and his associates launched a two-pronged attack on Mr. Armstrong to justify changing all the doctrines restored by him. They said Mr. Armstrong was not trained in hermeneutics, which means principles of Bible interpretation. Therefore, his interpretations of the Bible were not accurate, which is the reason he got his understanding of Christian doctrines wrong. Secondly, they accused Mr. Armstrong of copying the main ideas for his most important and most requested book by the public, United States and Britain in Prophecy, from another author, J.H. Allen's book, Judah's Scepter and Joseph's Birthright. Many among us who still adhere to what Mr. Armstrong taught were well educated with PhD and MA degrees and knew that Mr. Armstrong was a self taught man and was a first class researcher and historian. Moreover, all the PhDs in theology and mainstream Christianity who have all the training in hermeneutics, despite all their lifelong learning and study of the Bible, could not come to the knowledge of the truth. God specifically called Mr. Armstrong into his church and worked to specifically reveal the truths to him, which he then restored to God's church. As far as the Tkach's second criticism is concerned, here is where the diabolical intentions were exposed. First, information in Allen's book was nothing new. It was already known to British royal historians 50 to 70 years before Allen wrote his book in 1902. Mr. Armstrong was not copying from Allen, but was writing from historical facts which others were aware of. After the Tkach's criticism emerged, I read Allen's book about 20 to 25 years ago. A few weeks back, I tried to check again for similarities between Mr. Armstrong's and Allen's books. I downloaded a version of Allen's book and skimmed through it. I found that this version was not the same version that I had read decades ago. I realized that it had been doctored to look similar to Mr. Armstrong's book. Others who had access to both versions confirmed that the new reprint had indeed been doctored to concoct evidence that Mr. Armstrong had copied from Allen's book. Thus, the Tkach's and the German masqueraders' deceptions stood exposed, and both their criticisms of Mr. Armstrong's book fell apart. Further, we learned that Tkach Jr. and his associates tried to destroy Mr. Armstrong's writing by asking members to send copies they had by saying headquarters wanted to archive them. Then they burnt all the material that members sent in a bonfire. Tkach Jr. and his successors at Grace Communion International, the name that worldwide church ultimately adopted, do not pose a major threat to those who are adhering to what Mr. Armstrong taught, because GCI, Grace Communion, has done away with all the doctrines. However, some former Worldwide Church of God members may still be sitting on the fence about their decision to leave GCI and join another organization adhering to what Mr. Armstrong taught. I know that Tkach Jr. has contacted some former ministers and members for this purpose. That's why Tkach Jr. needs to be exposed. Those who genuinely do God's work are not given to lying and deception as Tkach Jr. and others are. and their primary goal is to deceive genuine members of God's church to deprive them of the chance for eternal life. Now, here is another example that illustrates the deadly danger members face when former leaders of a church go rogue, which can occur for any number of reasons. First and foremost, Satan sows tares or infiltrators in God's church, whose sole clandestine aim is to cause divisions, separate members from the true church, cause them as much as harm as possible in any way they can, or lead them out of the true church to draw them as followers and become their leader, or ultimately destroy the church. These are also known as wolves in sheep's clothing. Now, besides tares, there can be other leaders or members who go astray and have to be put out of the church to protect rest of the membership. Such people become very bitter against the church to the point of doing their utmost to destroy it from then onwards. Now, two examples in real life and modern era of God's church are the leaders of the Philadelphia Church of God and the Restored Church of God. Again, I am writing from the point of view of another organization, United Church of God, that had separated from the worldwide church, like the Philadelphia and Restored churches did. As already stated, PCG or Philadelphia Church and the RCG or Restored Church think all other organizations except their own are Laodicean churches, organizations who have compromised with what Mr. Armstrong taught. Therefore, that is PCG and RCG members, should stay away from them. However, as I have described in my e-booklet, Tale of the False Prophet and the Fake Apostle, I believe both men started off sincerely and have done good work, and their publications were useful as teaching tools. David Pack of the RCG did a great job of preserving what Mr. Armstrong taught. God used Gerald Flurry of the Philadelphia Church to warn the church about getting off track. His first publication, Malachi's Message, issued that warning to worldwide church leadership, which had begun changing the doctrines restored by God through Mr. Armstrong. Of course, later it became known that the Tkachs and the key people around them were all German masqueraders who were people of German ancestry living in white countries. They were planted in the church by Satan to destroy it from within. Gerald Flurry was among the early ministers to begin issuing the warning to the church, though another member, Jules Dervais, started it first, which I will discuss later. Now, serious troubles developed with both men and their organizations because both of them wanted all church members to come under their own organizations. Other senior leaders and ministers, however, did not see the signs whether they had been called by God to the top leadership position. In addition, viciously attacking other members and leaders not part of their own organizations as Laodiceans did not sit well with them. As I have already stated in part 1 video, in 1990, Satan told the Germans that I had been appointed to the office of a prophet. Apparently, that information had been shared with Gerald Flurry. In 1997, he started sending me his books and booklets. Then in early 2001, I joined his organization, the Philadelphia Church of God. At that time, he wrote a book titled Who is That Prophet?, claiming the title of a prophet for himself who was prophesied to come in the Bible. Then I wrote a 60-page article about what the Germans had told the world about me, that I had been appointed to the office of a prophet, and sent it to him. After reading what I had written, Gerald Flurry sent two of his ministers to ask me to recant what I had written, because he had already written that he himself was a prophet. I refused, so he put me out of his church. Then I joined the United Church of God, or UCG. I still continue to believe that Flurry was doing God's work of warning all people in the church who had gone astray. On December 2nd, 2006, I then started delivering my weekly messages. I believe the next event between Flurry and me occurred around 2007 to 2008. I had some doubts about Flurry's first book, Malachi's Message, and his claim that it was the little book prophesied in Revelation 10, as other church organizations did not believe so and criticized it. That's when an angel indicated to me that it did indeed contain the warning message to God's church prophesied in Revelation 10. From then on, I firmly believed that Gerald Flurry was doing God's work. Then another event occurred around 2009. Flurry, with another member in his church, went around places where Mr. Armstrong had lived or preached and any buildings he may have used. He claimed that he had found the rock on which Mr. Armstrong prayed, as he had mentioned in his autobiography, and brought it to headquarters of his church, that is the Philadelphia church. In my weekly message, I had started stating that God had delivered messages to me through angels beginning in 1994. Mr. Armstrong, in his 57 years of preaching from the time he gave his first sermon in 1928, had stated many times that he did not receive any direct message in words from God or an angel. All the truth God had restored through him was given to him by opening his understanding to the scriptures through research and study. Therefore, if anyone claims in our time that an angel or God has communicated to him, that communication is probably from Satan, the devil, or a demon. When I started claiming that I had received messages through angels, Flurry and David Pack pounced on it and started claiming that I was influenced by demons. I did not know they were spreading such rumors about me until only a couple of years ago. The next event occurred in 2016 when I realized that God Himself had provided the strongest possible proof that He had indeed delivered messages to me through angels. The first message delivered to me was in 1994, which was that the Sainis of India are Jews. I was reluctant to reveal to anyone that a message had been delivered to me by an angel for fear of being labeled demon influenced. But as I kept thinking on the message, I felt it must have been very important for God to send an angel to deliver it to me. So I took courage, and after 4 months of receiving it, I shared it with my local church assistant pastor, Mr. Maceo Hampton. Then 4 years later, in 1998, God delivered a message to the late Queen Elizabeth II that I was a descendant of King David, who was also a Jew. That corroborated the message to me and constituted the strongest possible proof that God had indeed delivered messages to me through angels. In 2016, I shared that proof in a couple of my weekly messages. Gerald Flurry was very quick to respond within a few months when he claimed that he had heard a voice that told him there was a new throne of David, which was Mr. Armstrong's prayer rock that he had found, and wrote a booklet about it, which I read. He had to concoct that false claim to counter the fact that God had delivered messages to me through angels, though all the previous years he had been slandering me by saying that the message delivered to me must have been from Satan and the demons. However, I still continue to believe that Flurry was doing God's work and did not dismiss his claim about Mr. Armstrong's prayer rock lightly. I also did not dismiss his claim that he had heard a voice apparently from an angel. Then an event occurred around Passover time in 2019, that is March, April, that left no doubt in my mind about where Flurry was coming from. To try and escape the prophesied 3.5 year long Great Tribulation for the American, British, and Jewish people, he joined the German masqueraders side and cemented the commitment to that side by meeting the hurdle qualification, which was to murder. It was confirmed to me that he had indeed done so. From then on, I knew that Flurry had gone rogue. Still, after an angel had told me that Flurry's book Malachi's message was a warning message to God's church to get on track, I still had to rehearse in my mind my history with Gerald Flurry for a few months before I reached the inescapable conclusion that Flurry had indeed gone wrong. Also, it's almost impossible to expect a genuine man of God to murder an innocent person to save his skin during the Great Tribulation. That's why, without a shadow of doubt, I concluded that Flurry had gone rogue. I realized that Gerald Flurry started very well, but when he was told that I had been appointed to the office of a prophet, he felt that he may no longer have the preeminence in God's church that he earnestly desired. He felt that his dreams of being the sole successor to Mr. Armstrong's works would be belied. That's when he started lying and started claiming titles for himself beginning with his booklet, Who is That Prophet, in 2001. Mr. Armstrong's prayer rock was just another attempt to have himself identified as the closest to Mr. Armstrong and his work by honoring his memory. When given proof that God had indeed delivered messages to me through angels, he had to invent a diabolical lie that he had heard a voice and that Mr. Armstrong's prayer rock, which was another hoax that he could identify the rock as the very one on which Mr. Armstrong prayed, he had to invent that it was the new throne of David. It was also blasphemous in that he claimed that it had now replaced the original stone of Scone, which is in the coronation chair in Westminster Abbey, on which British monarchs are coronated. He had also lied that he was descended from British royalty, as this is a requirement for holding the top position in God's church, as prophesied in Genesis 49, verse 10, which states, The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his teeth, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. The scepter promised to Judah is being fulfilled by the British monarchs, and the promise of a lawgiver is being fulfilled by the top leader in God's church. Mr. Armstrong descended from British royalty. Now, this is what I wrote in my ebook, Tale of the False Prophet and Fake Apostle, concerning Gerald Flurry's work. Soon after Mr. Armstrong's death on January 16, 1986, a former church member named Jules Dervais Jr. wrote a series of 7 letters starting in December 1986 through January 3, 1988 to Joseph Tkach Sr. and many others at headquarters, regional offices, and field ministers, titled Letter to Laodicea, disagreeing with the changes the Tkachs were making. Copies were also sent to Gerald Flurry, David Pack, and about 230 other leaders and ministers in Worldwide Church of God. Now, Dervais identified 5 indicators that the church had become Laodicean after Mr. Armstrong's death. Number 1, Philadelphia era of God's church ended at Mr. Armstrong's death. Number 2, identified Joseph Tkach Sr. as the Joshua of Zechariah 3, verse 8 and verse 3. Worldwide Church of God was doing away with the doctrine of miraculous healing. That is why Gerald Flurry has been very strict and unbalanced in applying that doctrine in PCG, forgetting that Mr. Armstrong said it is the individual member's personal decision. This is in the original. Number 4, the church ministry was indicted for getting off track in the book of Malachi 2, verses 8 to 9 and 5. The man of sin mentioned in 2 Thessalonians 2, 3 to 4 was in the church also. Now, Gerald Flurry realized that Jules Dervais was right, but his ideas were half-baked. Dervais did not know how to conduct thorough biblical research on a subject and the writing skills to convey his ideas lucidly. Therefore, over about 9 months of research, Gerald Flurry developed further what Dervais had written and wrote his book titled Malachi's Message. Before he could start distributing the book, someone reported the matter to headquarters in Pasadena, California. GRF and his assistant John Amos were immediately disfellowshipped from the church by Joseph Tkach Jr., Director of Church Administration. Flurry then, with his son, his assistant John Amos, and some others, started the Philadelphia Church of God in 1990. On now reading what I wrote about Mr. Dervais in my ebook and rereading his writings again, I think I was less than fair to him, for which I sincerely and humbly apologize to Mr. Dervais. I believe God gave him the earliest insight into what Tkach and his associates were up to. Here is how I have viewed in the last decade or so about how God's work of beginning, warning the Tkachs, their associates and followers to repent and get back on track, was carried out. God first used Mr. Dervais to warn Worldwide Church of God and his leaders to get back on track, beginning in December 86 for about 3 years until early 1990. Then God used Gerald Flurry to do the work of warning the church beginning in 1990 when he started PCG. Starting with Mr. Dervais's insight, Mr. Flurry then did more thorough research in writing his book Malachi's Message to warn worldwide church leadership and members. Now, as I said, I had doubts about Mr. Flurry's claim that Malachi's message was the little book of Revelation 10, verses 2 to 3, which state, "And he had in his hand a little book open, and he set his right foot upon the sea, and his left foot on the earth, and cried with a loud voice, as when a lion roars. And when he had cried, 7 thunders uttered their voices." Just then I was thinking about this issue. Then angel opened my eyes to see and communicated to me that Malachi's message was indeed the little book that contained the message that 7 thunders uttered that John was told not to write. Now God used Gerald Flurry mightily from end of 1989 to about end of 2000 to preach his warning message to church leaders and members. But then he started lying to maintain his preeminent status, much like Diotrephes in 3 John chapter 1 verse 9, which states, "I wrote to the church but Diotrephes, who loves to have the preeminence among us, does not receive us." But he was named as the only successor to Mr. Armstrong. He started working on his book, Who is That Prophet, to claim status of a prophet, which I realized around 2019 that God had not assigned it to him. I joined his church in early 2001. To continue to maintain his lies and to discourage me, he disfellowshipped me from his church. When he started scheming to lie and write his book, Who is That Prophet, it seems God started preparing another man to warn the worldwide church leaders and members to get back on track. That man was David C. Pack when he started a Restored Church of God in May 1999. He too warned the worldwide Church of God leaders about their apostasy and the members to return to the faith once delivered through Mr. Armstrong and the doctrines restored through him. Now, God usually completes his work in 19-year time cycles. After Mr. Armstrong's death on January 16, 1986, Mr. DeWay started the warning work on December 31, 1986. One 19-year time cycle brings us to December 2005 to January 2006. I believe that's when I started getting signals that I should start preaching the gospel. It took me 9 months to get started and another 2 months to begin delivering my weekly messages on December 2nd, 2006. The work of warning the church to get back on track had been completed. After that, the world entered the time of delay no longer in fulfilling of end time events. The next phase of God's work then began with my messages to fulfill the prophecy in Revelation 10, verse 11. And he said to me, "You must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, languages, and kings." In 2010, United Church of God was in the process of splitting, with about 1/3 of ministers and members planning to leave and start a separate Church of God organization called the Church of God, a Worldwide Association, or COGWA. I wrote a letter to heads of UCG, PCG, RCG, and LCG in an attempt to unify the churches of God that still adhere to what Mr. Armstrong taught. My effort came to nothing. Probably that's when Gerald Flurry, David Pack, and other leading ministers in various Church of God organizations started claiming that I was demon influenced because I claimed that God had delivered messages to me through angels. Though my attempt was unsuccessful in unifying the churches, apparently it started communications between the various leaders. They started discussing prophecy and the coming great tribulation prophesied by Jesus Christ in Matthew 24, verses 21 to 22, among themselves and how to maximize their chances of survival. Of course, many of the top leaders were German masqueraders who were in touch with the masquerader leadership. They learned that the masqueraders were in control of the military and the government, and the German masquerader victory in the coming civil war in America was assured. Under those circumstances, it was simply wise to join the masquerader side and be the persecutor rather than the persecuted. Three discussions and communications among these 20 to 25 leaders must have continued for 6 to 8 weeks. They had already learned that Germany and China was trying to involve the United States in a war since 2014, when they had developed new weapons to bring down aircraft with laser weapons, which they tested in Malaysian, Indonesian, Ethiopian, and Ukrainian airlines. All these leaders then decided to take the plunge before it was too late and make a commitment to the masquerader side by meeting the hurdle qualification of murdering a white adult and a child of non-German ancestry. In April 2019, Gerald Flurry and David Pack were among the perhaps 70-odd leaders and ministers who did so. In other words, in other videos, I will discuss the consequences of Gerald Flurry, David Pack, and other leaders joining the masquerader side, and the further evidence that shows how Gerald Flurry and David Pack have gone completely rogue, and members of God's church should avoid them, their writings, and their churches because their primary motive now is to deceive. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please continue to watch my videos and read my articles on important world events, World War III watch, politics, international business, advice on health and medical problems, and much more for in-depth and insightful analysis. Please also subscribe to my YouTube and Facebook channels on Mass Truth with Harmanjit Saini to view and get information on the latest videos. Some people do not have the time to go through the full length of videos. They find it more convenient to read the length of the video. Unfortunately, YouTube does not provide that capability to make the text of my videos available on YouTube. But fortunately, Facebook does provide that capability. So I make the text of my videos available on Facebook channel, which you can easily copy.